To take your mics as you require them. Start off, I think, by just going around the panel, allowing them to introduce themselves, indicate the areas of research that they are involved with, and then perhaps tell us a little bit about what they think the big next step or the big future for AI is within those areas. Yeah, Jose, why don't you make a start?
So, yeah, I'm José Hernández-Orallo. I'm professor at Technical University of Valencia, also affiliated with the sister Center for the Future of Intelligence inside ITH. And what we do in the team here is AI evaluation, which basically means how we can capture the capabilities and the safety of AI systems. And in terms of profiles, rather than just saying, okay, good, bad, and it's a kind of a simplistic analysis. And something that we are expecting in the future is to move more towards predictability, operating ranges of these systems, and also going more in the direction of what comes next. More superhuman, even we don't like the word, kind of capabilities that we are finding in AI, how to evaluate them. And related to what we are discussing here, to think about AI evaluation more broadly in the future, how can we really measure the impact, the benefit for society, and also the risk in a better way than we are doing now, which is quite anecdotally. So yeah, that's a little bit the future.
So we were talking earlier on a little bit about your interests, and you mentioned to me that you're quite interested in intelligence and quite what that actually means. I wonder if you'd like to say a few words about that. What do you think intelligence is? What is it that we're trying to emulate here with AI?
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a tension. I think that we saw that in the first talk by Neil this morning. The tension between intelligence is a very specialized thing. We have many. And then we have intelligence, just one thing, and we have to scale that up in a monolithic dimension. I think it's neither of these two things. I think it's something in the middle. There's a kind of a common ground. There's a kind of a general intelligence in animals. So there's kind of an emergent evolution. So that's something more than this is kind of a specialized things. Even in the evolution of AI, we have seen that there's a kind of a convergence into systems that are general purpose. And that's not coincidence. That's something intrinsic in intelligence. What we mean by intelligence, it comes out from there. So I think that I went into AI because I wanted to understand intelligence. So for me, AI is just an instrument for that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Kate, would you like to take the mic?
Hi, I'm Katie. I'm a final year PhD student in CBL with Adrienne Weller. And one question that really excites me is how we can build AI systems that meet our expectations and complement our limitations. I think it's a really interesting question to think about because we can imagine building a system that completely meets our expectations. But to get there, it might either be so human-like that we can kind of understand what it's going to do based on our knowledge of what people do, or it'd be so simple that we can then predict how it's going to act. But that doesn't really leverage the advantages that we might get from AI systems. Conversely, if we build a system that completely complements us, complements our limitations, we might not be able to understand how we should use it, when we should use it, why we should use it. So I think navigating that trade-off is a really interesting question that will inspire a lot of future innovations and also more evaluation, as Jose was just talking about. I'm particularly interested in computational cognitive science as a method that we can go about kind of building better tools to help us address that question. I think that we'll see a lot more innovations in the coming years on both better understanding people computationally and then using those models of people to better predict how they might act with AI systems towards more human-compatible AI thought partnerships. So those are some areas that I'm really excited about.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're always trying to do is, for some reason, we're trying to emulate humans. Yeah. So which humans are we trying to emulate?
That's a great question. I think, yeah, as Jose was just talking about, intelligence is so multifaceted that someone who's an expert fields medalist in mathematics might not excel in some other areas. And I think that really gets to the part of meeting expectations and complementing their limitations, that we want to help people go beyond what they're capable of. And that might be different for any one person. And that could be at both the model level or as see Umang right there, who thinks a lot about the interface kind of adaptive level as well.
Yeah. So what about ethics? I mean, whose ethics do we think we should imbue AI with?
That's a great question. I think there's some other people who, from the AI Security Institute and other places, who really think deeply about that, as well as others at CFI. I think it's a really good question. I don't have clear answers on that, but yeah, it's important to think about.
Okay, cool. Milind, would you like to take the mic? I think you just speak into it. You'll find that it's magically going to work.
All right, good. So I've already spoken this morning, and I'm so grateful that all of you are here. What an amazing conference. Thank you, Anna. So I wanted to just talk about two things. One, as I mentioned towards the end of my talk, at least in the area of AI for social good, one of the things is how can we accelerate the whole process so that it's not bottlenecked by AI experts as much. Specifically, the dream would be, recently, for example, a group with the World Health Organization and somebody in South Africa contacted us, okay, how can we allocate limited number of HIV tests in their population? So instead of going through this whole process, figuring out all the details of the problem, so on and so forth, if they could just sit at their terminal and say, this is our problem, this is what we need. We have limited number of HIV tests, and an agent can converse with them and say, okay, here's now ultimately a system that allocates that limited number of HIV tests. Maybe test it in simulation with simulated people who may interact in some way so that some of the randomized control trial effort could be reduced. That would be my ultimate goal, is like having this kind of a system that automates a lot of these processes so that we can get AI out there for social good faster. I'll say one other thing about education since we are here. So I teach AI for social good. I do this exactly the way I was taught AI, which was, here's a bunch of random theses from people, case studies. There's no methods. People used to tease us that AI is hot air. There's nothing there. But that's how AI developed slowly. Then textbooks came out and so on and so on. I feel AI for social good is in a similar situation right now, where we teach people a whole bunch of cases and try to get them to extract lessons. It would be nice if we could arrive at lesson plans that are more general and develop these kinds of textbooks and build up a body of knowledge that is more general than just individual case studies. So those would be my two dream scenarios.
So just returning to the first point about all the people who might formulate questions that we could address. There must be many, many millions of those questions. And somebody's got to prioritize them. Is the priority going to be, or the prioritization going to be, what the AI solutions are? Are we looking at AI solutions prioritizing the problems that we solve?
That's, I think, so this is an awesome question. Certainly, all of the work has to be done with deep partnership. This is always true for us with organizations on the ground, beginning to end. It's never the case that we take a problem, go out thinking, come back, say, here's a solution for you. Worse yet, here's a solution for you, even if you didn't ask for that solution. So it's always step by step, always interacting. Exactly, is this what you want? Is this what you want? And then ultimately testing it and so forth. So I would imagine these are hard questions that ultimately will require that continued partnership to be able to answer.
Okay. Thank you very much, all three of you, for some really fascinating answers there. So I'd just like to move on to thinking a little bit about academia. So my understanding of the AI field in terms of its investment, research and deployment is that it is heavily, heavily skewed towards industry. That's where the investment money goes. That's where the deployment capabilities are. They're really deciding what's going on at the moment anyway with AI. So perhaps each of you in turn would like to make a few comments about how academia can fit into that landscape and make some positive impact. Katie, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I think one great way that academia and industry can collaborate is through student researcher positions. I was really fortunate in the early part of my PhD to get a chance to go work at Google DeepMind while doing my PhD here, and I got to see how research is being done both in industry and kind of reflect and shape back how I then was going to structure my research. Because I think that academia has a lot to offer in terms of innovation, being able to place longer-term bets. Also, we saw in the last great talk that there's real issues with privacy from using these bigger models, that with open source groups and kind of academia, we can then address different kinds of questions. So I think that's really important. I think there's a third increasing player, like the AI Security Institute, which then can help offer other ways to really take on big-scale evaluation with these models, bring in other kinds of money that can then help academia also act as kind of a check or a safeguard on some of what industry might be doing.
Could you just expand a little bit on that? What do you mean by a check or a safeguard? How might that work out in the world?
I think it's really important that we have external evaluations for what these models are doing, what they're capable of. Also, imaginative new ways of evaluating, like Jose was talking about. So I think it's important that the model builders aren't the only ones evaluating these tools, and that they're not only using internal evaluators to assess. and also releasing those evaluations more transparently.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Milind, would you like to have a stab at that one?
So the specific case I wanted to point out is the work we've been doing with this nonprofit Herman. So this is a collaboration between Harvard and Google. And I wanted to point out the way this all came about is there's a specific legal agreement between the two organizations to collaborate. As long as the work is for this nonprofit, everything is open source, nobody claims IP. And this is really, this single agreement I felt really was very helpful because students could access work with Herman. Google could, researchers could mentor students, like you said. Ultimately, when the students developed their ideas, which were sometimes innovative ideas and so on, ultimately something worked. And then Google engineers could jump in and take that model and deploy it with Herman. I feel like it was a win-win-win for everybody. The nonprofit obviously benefited from the best of both worlds. Google's investments helped, Harvard's students helped, and they both got things out of it. So I want to propose, at least within my area, that there could be these kinds of productive collaborations between academia and industry. The key obstacle really is IP issues and making sure that the IP issues get resolved. And so there has to be some framework around IP, and at least for challenges related to social impact. Potentially, we just agree that this is all going to be open source. Everything will be released in the public domain. And maybe that's a way that can be moved forward.
Yeah, I'm just going to hijack the talk a little bit because somebody who has such contact with industry. Here in CHIA, one of the things that we want to try and do is educate the next generation of AI specialists. So I know you mentioned education just in your response there to the question. I mean, what do you think industry, people like Google and DeepMind and so on, what kind of people are they looking for coming out of universities?
Okay, great question. I guess my postdocs and students all feel that it's all, there's pressure. We don't want to, this AI for social good is going to be a little bit of a problem because people are not looking for these kinds of impact-driven works and so on and so forth. And it's all about sort of these large language models and diffusion models and so on and so forth. Certainly, we want to be experts at these, the latest models and so on. But I would imagine that if work is done that's deeply impactful, that's still valued. And so at least that's been my first-hand experience. And so I guess that's my advice to my students. I don't know who wants to take that advice, but it's like, do impactful work, be up on the latest, and the system will work in your favor. Trust the system, it'll work.
Okay, we're going to put our confidence in you. Jose, would you like to mention a few words about how we can do something in academia?
Yeah, I'm going to be a little wild with the answer, perhaps, because we are seeing more automation in science. This is going to be something more and more common in the following years. So I was surprised by one plot that Lorenzo Pacchiardi, who is around there in our team, showed me a few weeks ago about the questions in science are becoming more challenging, but at the same time, the number of researchers is growing exponentially in the past maybe 5 decades or so. You will see how many people are doing research, and we need more. But there will be a time, perhaps, that we are going to have this kind of, some of these people, maybe in San Francisco, this army of researchers doing research for us. Maybe that's the case, I don't know. But then perhaps the role of academia and companies is going to be more thinking about the research questions and not that much answering them, because this is going to be becoming, I'm not saying that immediately it's going to become completely automated, but there's going to be more like that, and there's going to be some new pressures in computer science. We need compute to do things these days. It's much more relevant. I remember 20 years ago, I only needed just a sheet of paper, and I did my papers with that. And now you need credits, you need these things, you need agreements with them. In the future, this is going to be more so. So I think that maybe our role is, okay, what are the questions that matter? That matter for for really that we were discussing. You were talking about this morning. What are the questions that really matter for people? And in applied research, but also in fundamental research. Maybe we are talking that much about what the short-term versus long-term in science, and it's maybe more questions that matter and questions that maybe don't matter.
Yeah, that sort of addresses the issue of the sort of known unknowns. So we know what the problem is, we're just looking for a solution to it. What about the unknown unknowns? How do we build creativity into that and innovation?
Yeah, maybe that's going to be more the role of academia, I think. But maybe we should get rid of some of the pressures in terms of publish and perish and these kind of stupid things, and then maybe, okay, yeah, isolate, go to a bench here on the come, and just think about the things that matter, like the unknowns, basically people who are not talking, the things that people are not talking about. That's challenging. That's really challenging. That needs a little bit more of a pause, and the world is not at a pause now, so it's becoming more challenging.
Okay, well, thank you, the three of you. We do have some time now and timetabled in for you to ask some questions of the panel. If you do have any questions.
A follow-up question, I guess, on that last discussion, which is, I think it's a bad idea just to see academia as, only auditing and evaluating what's done by, big tech. There are like a number of, and I guess we'll come to this like later in the day, there are a number of strategic areas where you can't just leave it up to the big tech companies. So we're thinking, environmental research, to health, where be a very bad thing, I think, if we had AI companies just left to do research in that area, notwithstanding they've got important work to be done. There are like massive national and public good interests there. So do you think in those areas that maybe, academia should be a home to, large government stroke philanthropic institutes that should sort of take on these problems for society's good and be training big models to do this, like in those places?
I see a parallel with some kind of compute infrastructures. I think that maybe this is the moment that we need to claim more of funding that is independent from the public's funding on research. It doesn't mean just universities, but research centers and that means infrastructure as well. And there's going to be more direction in this of computing infrastructure, because it's the trend we are going. And that this is not, of course, just on the hands. But I think that the collaboration between industry and academia is going to be here, but that doesn't mean that there are some other areas that are going to disappear. It's going to be tricky, and we are talking at the University of Cambridge, but think at some other universities around the world, they have even more challenges to compete and to do something meaningful than maybe the University of Cambridge. So I think that the view is a little more complex if you think worldwide about what some other universities or academia worldwide they can do.
Just jumping on from that, how can universities spin out companies that work on AI as opposed to just doing the research, actually do the, create businesses, create tech companies? Because research businesses that spin out of research are often much more impactful. So how can we facilitate more of that happening at universities? I know Cambridge is Cambridge Enterprise, but what is doing around this piece on AI and projects spinning out from research from you guys?
About that. It's very, very interesting. I guess just a small anecdote. My son has a startup in Bay Area, and he, so earlier on, I was advising a startup done by my students. And so this is not to contradict what you said, but my son's criticism, he said one day, he said, Dad, your company had 3 problems. One was that you guys were focused on research as opposed to actually trying to solve a real world problem. And so I feel this is just to say that, we have to be a little bit careful about being wedded to our research, because these are startups where you really need to look at the real world problem and try and figure out what actually matters. So a lot of universities have all kinds of startup machinery to try to push research out. There's stuff at Harvard. I'm sure there's stuff here. But just that's the one note of caution I have for people who are trying to do startups from their research is because my goal for that was like, let us show how game theory is really useful as opposed to what is the real problem we are trying to solve.
Well, thank you very much to all our panelists. Let's thank them ourselves with our traditional way.